Hi, I'm Patsy Rublin, and I'm here with Mitch Green and William David Black and Nancy Green. We're affiliated with the Malden chapter of the Missouri VHP. And today's date is June 14th, 2017, and this is the Malden Boot Hill Youth Museum, 700A North Douglas Street in Malden, Missouri. Okay, so David, tell me a little bit about you growing up.
Well, I grew up in Malden. I was born in Denver, Colorado. And by the way, this is Flag Day, so it's kind of an apropos, if you will. I was born in Denver, Colorado, and 2 weeks later, my mother and I were on a train back to Malden, Missouri. And I arrived in Malden by train 2 weeks after June 25th, 1947. So growing up in Malden, I graduated from grade school, and then I graduated from high school. And then from there, I went into, in Malden, my family, real quick, was my mother's family had a hardware store. And then my mother married Alan Black, who later, who did establish the Malden Press Merit. And so we were a newspaper family, and we also had a hardware store. And so life in the 40s, late 40s, I don't remember much, but the life in the 50s was very typical of a small town. I can remember growing up here, seeing the parades from the Anderson Air Activity, which was established shortly after World War II. And in fact, my brother was born on the Malden Air Base. So the military was something that I was familiar with even at a younger age. And so it was a good life. It was an exciting life. And once I finished high school, then I went on to Southeast Missouri State College at that time.
In Cape.
Cape Girardeau, Missouri.
Okay. Well, you were in the military. How did that happen?
In the summer of 1966, while I was in summer school, went down and to the mailbox, and there was my draft papers. So the draft was extensive at that time, and so there basically wasn't any other, they were just taking everyone. And so that summer, I spoke with my dad. We had a conversation, what are you going to do, obviously. My mother was very concerned. The height of Vietnam was in everyone's mind. The country was, at that time, in turmoil. There was a lot of division in the country. And there were people that were evading the draft. That was not in my mind at all. I spoke with my dad, and he said, well, I was in the Navy, in the submarines in World War II. He said, the Navy takes care of their own. They're a family. And, we don't really want you to go to Vietnam. And we think that maybe perhaps you would have an experience in the Navy which would be, your mother wouldn't worry so much, right. One of those things. Right. So I waited for a few days, and I made my decision to go into the Navy because I thought that it would be an exciting adventure. Right. And I was ready to serve. I wanted to go. I felt like that the country had called, and at that time there was a feeling that this is what we have to do. There was, I did watch the news on television, and so I had an idea of what perhaps was what was the reasons. We thought we had an idea. And so I made that decision. And in October of 1966, I left on a bus with other Malden citizens, a lot of my class, some classmates, some people I knew. We were off to St. Louis to swear in.
And for those of us that were kind of young during Vietnam and don't really remember, in '66, how long had the war been going on? Was this the beginning, the middle?
It was, they had sent advisors, if you will, to go in and in the early 60s, and the war really in 66 was really at a pitch. This was the beginning of the big push of 66, 67, 68. There was a lot of us were drafted at that time. And some joined, by the way. I mean, most everyone was drafted, at that time.
So you went to St. Louis. You're in a bus with a whole bunch of other guys. After you get sworn in, where did you head?
Well, we had our physical, and we got on a train in St. Louis. And then from there, those of us in the Navy, of course, that signed up, went to Great Lakes, Michigan. So we took a train from Michigan to Chicago, and we all laughed because there wasn't any beer on the train halfway up there. Young men, even those who couldn't drink were not legal drinking age. But we arrived at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning in Great Lakes, Michigan. And from there was, I eventually finished there with the class, or the troop 617, which was our Great Lakes training class. And my mother showed this to me not long ago, and I thought, my word, Mother, I didn't know you even had that photograph.
Where are you in that photo?
Well, let's see if I hadn't really pinpointed myself, but it would take too long.
Oh, okay.
I mean, there's somewhere.
All right. Okay.
But it was kind of I was really glad that my mother had saved something like this. I thought it was interesting.
So when you got off the train, were you met by your...
We were, it was, like early in the morning, and we were met by the welcoming committee from boot camp.
What was the welcome like?
And well, it was like Orwell's 1984. That's what it reminded me of. I thought, oh, this is really bizarre, the whole thing. We went into a barracks. The barracks didn't even have, weren't ready for us before they shuffled us off to our own particular barracks. They just huddled us in this one building, and eventually we had breakfast that morning, and we joined up with our command. It was very much like a feeling of World War II, because we watched a lot of World War II training films. They were obviously not ready for Vietnam, so we had our company commanders, and we had our platoon leaders, and we manned up for training, and it was intense training, and we left in December of 1966. I got on another train, and my folks met me over in Illinois, and so then I came home for leave. And from there, the story begins. I went to California, to San Diego, and I was picked to be in the amphibious Navy, which was an integral part of the Vietnam War, because of our missions were to support the riverine patrols, the 9th Infantry, the Marine battalions. They came on board. But anyway, as I left San Diego, I had a photograph taken at the YMCA. That seemed to be the YMCA thing. Now I want to be honest in this. I did not own this jacket. It was a YMCA jacket,
wow.
Which I thought was very cool.
That's cool.
And it was my hat, but the photographer said, well, we've got a jacket here if you'd like to put that on. I think I might have even been in civilian clothes at the YMCA. Right. Well, pardon me, we never wore civilian clothes. Off the ship, we had our uniforms, then we put them in a locker. So, that was the way, the rules at that time. So that was my photograph just before we left for Vietnam, so I thought I would bring that to sort of
So I have a question. I don't know if this is about boot camp or further on. I know that, the Mississippi River is kind of close. But how much experience on a boat did you have before you went in?
I love to fish.
Oh, okay.
So I did a lot of fishing on boats on occasion, and no experience as far as being on a large river. That was soon to be an integral part of my job, was to be on the rivers in Vietnam.
Okay.
This is the USS Montrose. It was APA 212. It used to be LPA 212, and they eventually changed it. This was a troop carrier. It carried combat equipment and men and personnel, 1,500 men. And on board are small craft. And you can see on the side of the ship, this is not a very good photo, unfortunately, are LCVPs, as they were called, landing craft vehicle personnel, is what that stands for. And those were the Higgins boats from World War II, that when a landing is made, the ramp falls down, personnel and equipment debark, and we would drop down on the side of the ship. Many times I had the Marines, our infantry, the Army, would come down on the ladder, or on the rope, and they would embark into the boat. We would go out to the side of the ship, and we would circle up. And then we would go in waves, is what they call waves. Okay. Now, I did that for a couple of years. And we were also an integral part of the mothership for Mobile Riverine, which is the River Flotilla 117. And this was these were riverine operations that we supported. And anytime we were in Vietnam, I went over 3 tours, were 9 months each. And we would train up on the way over. Once we got there, then we would join up forces with the South Vietnamese as well.
So what does that mean about training up? So
well, training up was learning how to go to combat, general quarters as they called it, also to fight fires on the ship. We would at times be in the Pacific Ocean, which is quite large, unescorted most of the time. We were not with like a carrier battle group. Okay. We were by ourselves. Right. So you had to be very prepared for any calamity in the middle of the ocean because no one would reach you in time. Mm-hmm. In fact, as we were coming back from one of our tours, our ship caught on fire one night. We were all sitting down there. We were all excited about going home, and a fire broke out. And I can tell you that is an alarming experience, but we were so well trained that we had the fire out in a short period of time in the galley. Is where the fire started, and down, I think down one of those.
It's always in the kitchen, isn't it?
Yeah, somebody's in the kitchen. And I think it was a galley fire at that time. But, you know, what we did was we had pontoons would tie up alongside us. The riverine forces is where we had a lot of support.
Now, so you're on the ship heading to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Where do you sleep? Where do you eat?
Well, we have a bunk, which is just long enough for you to be in, and there's a locker just big enough for your uniforms. We weren't allowed to have civilian clothes because only the officers could have civilian clothes. So when we were overseas, we were always in our uniform at that time because the Navy did not allow civilian clothes on the ships in the early part of 60s. We had that bunk, and it's very, very tight quarters. There's like 4 or 5 in a tier, so you got people above you and below, and you know, and we privacy was treasured. Mm-hmm. When you got into your bed, you shut the curtain, and that was your little world, and that was your domain of privacy.
Top bunk, middle bunk?
I had the middle bunk at one time, which wasn't bad. Mm-hmm. I've had all top, bottom, and middle over time on other ships. I served on 3 other ships while I was in the Navy.
And do you get close to those guys, or do they just drive you crazy?
Absolutely, closer than you really want sometimes. Okay. But no, these are your shipmates that, when you're serving, when you're on mission, or when you're on patrol, when you're on the rivers, everyone is paying attention. Right. And to this day, and I was going to show you that, I'm still a member of the USS Montrose Association, which meets every 2 years. And in fact, I went to the reunion 2 years ago in Branson, and they're going to have another reunion coming up this year in Charleston, Missouri. Charleston, South Carolina. Okay.
Did you do anything besides work and sleep?
Well, what was interesting is that we would, there was time for liberty. When we were supporting, we'd get away for R&R. So there are times when the ship would, we went to various places. We went to Japan, we went to the Philippines to refuel, to refurbish,
Was that a culture shock for you?
That's time for liberty, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then we went to Hong Kong a couple of times. So there's actually a cruise book. I didn't bring those, but they show all the cruise members and what we did, and the military understands that you must have some relaxation. So even at sea, we would have cookouts. So they would, cook up a big meal, and on the holidays they would have, a festival. We were paid in real money at that time, on the mess decks. We didn't get a check or anything. We went down and we got our pay with real money. And then when we were in Vietnam, we could go. We did go into Saigon and Da Nang. You had to be, aware of what was going on, and we'd get in these wired up buses and then go into town, and we would be a full battle going up the river, and then we'd have GQ, and we all looked at each other and went, really? GQ's over with, and we're going to have a Liberty call. And so that was kind of strange, and some did go in, some didn't, as however you felt comfortable. And I was also, when we were tied up, we were there during Tet offensives.
And tied up means?
Being a pure side.
Oh, okay.
We actually went up the rivers with pilots, and there was no vegetation because they got rid of all the vegetation. It was Agent Orange. It was, and you could see us and maybe another ship. It looked like we were on land, ships on land because of off in a distance. So, anytime we were on the rivers and we didn't have vegetation, we were safe. We felt like we were safe. But, it was a strange time. It was, because we would read the Stars and Stripes, and I regret not keeping those Stars and Stripes copies, because I've been to the Stars and Stripes Museum in Bloomfield, and they're looking for copies. They didn't keep a copy of everything, and they're looking for it. And there was lots of protests, a lot of anger in the country, in the United States I'm speaking of. And so we felt different, that, what's going on. We felt like what we were doing, and, after a while we kind of realized that this was a futile war. I'll be quite honest with you. Yeah, at that time.
Yeah, it's hard when you don't feel like there's support somewhere.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. We returned home. I think that what's interesting is after 4 years, I was discharged in July of 1970. I had a 3-month early out to go to school at Cape to re-enroll into school. And coming back was, and even being in San Diego, there was a lot of animosity. We were pretty obvious that we were in the military. We stayed with ourselves. The people actually did, occasionally, protesters would throw things, and it was not a good time, not really. In fact, when I got back, I sat down. The only person I talked to was my dad. We talked about it, and I'm talking more about it now than I ever thought about.
Did you feel the same way when you came into town?
No, there was no one there to greet. There was nothing, and I'll talk about that a little later. But I did speak with my dad, and we talked about it. And from there, I moved on. I didn't even list my service and resumes for several years. Just didn't want to, have any discussion about it. I didn't know how the employers would feel about it, whether they were for or against it. So it was a solitude, a moment about what we did and what went on, and there was always the camaraderie with our shipmates, and those people we could count on and be with. Yeah.
You talk about your shipmates. Is there a guy or a group of guys that?
Well, the USS Montrose is a very close-knit group, and we were just there, last year, and it was like we had just left. It was it's always an amazing experience to get back with your shipmates, and I have some that are very close that I stay in touch with today, and we're still helping each other, and so we talked about why we really cared so much about each other, and everybody absolutely concluded it was the war. It's what we went through. It's what we experienced in combat from time to time. I mean, it's just a very close, growing experience. So, and I also can talk about, I went back into the Navy in 1980, 10 years later. And so I must say that when I was I wanted to say that while I was on the Montrose, I was a boat coxswain for a couple of years. And one day I heard someone say, if you can type, we need help in the ship's office. Well, I learned how to type at a very young age of 14, took typing in high school. I went in and sat down and typed 80, 90 words a minute, and I finally got clean uniforms. I got off the boats. I was taking care, I was a yeoman, striking for a yeoman. And when I did leave the Montrose, I was a second-class yeoman. That's right. So, that was good. My daughter had been born, and you get, when you have family and so forth, that means a lot to you, and so I just felt like that was something.
Yeah, I want to take you back a little bit. Mm-hmm. I know the last time we spoke, you talked a little bit about the Tet offensive.
Well, we were in the Tet offensive. We were tied up pierside. There was a lot going on, and we were there to protect the ship. They were, the military itself was surrounded, obviously, our ship, because we couldn't get underway. That was just the case it was. So we did not debark off the ship. We just went to general quarters, preparing for any situation while we were there. And the strange thing about Vietnam, I can remember the waters were always in turmoil. And anytime we were up next to the ship, when I brought my boat up next to the ship, there was a great deal of current. And it never stopped when I was in Vietnam while we were there. The guns never seemed to stop. Went on all day, went on all night, and at night we would get in picket boats. In our LCVPs, these were picket boats that we went around the ship all night long, throwing concussion grenades near the ship for mines, or mostly for swimmers. And as you're out there, maybe from midnight till 4 in the morning. The skies are still busy with military artillery,
so no opportunity for peace and
you can
quiet
see flares all night long, and puff, which on tape.
Go ahead.
Okay.
That's a great story. You talked about your engineer. Mm-hmm. Tell us, I know that you and I talked a little bit about what your role on the boat was, mm-hmm. but can you be a little more specific?
Well, on the ship, I was in boat group. Boat group is a division. And our job was to take care of this boat, this LCVP. Okay. That was my total responsibility. When anybody got on that boat, they had to do whatever I said. It was just like a captain of a ship. Okay. Somebody has to be in charge. So that was basically a lot of maintenance on the boat, a lot of training, and
so this is one of those ones where
the ramp falls down.
Okay.
You have 3 people on there. There's the boat coxswain, there's the bow hook, He is the bow hook is a sailor that grabs the rope when I come up to the ship. I've got to pull that rope and tether myself to the side of the ship, and then equipment and our troops come down. Then you've got an engineer, and that was Robert's job. And he is to, we have any problems. This boat only went 18 knots at top end.
So you're fighting the current both ways, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to be careful too, even when you're going in. We did a lot of beach landings in San Diego, and so you could broach, you have to be careful getting in on the beach, riding the surf at the right time, and then backing out. That's always a big issue because the back of the boat is square. Oh. And so there's a lot of water throwing over you, and there's equipment out there in case you roll over. They'll come out and pull it over. I mean, that's the last thing you want to happen. So that was, boat group was, if you will, the hot dog division. Right. We were the main battery. We had 20 millimeter guns that we practiced on, and we did.
So you were armed then?
Yes, we had a 45, a BAR 45, but we had escorts. I mean, that's important to remember. We were not fully combat equipped. We had swift boats and helicopters. When we went up those rivers, it was a big operation in that particular time.
And how many would you carry?
36. 36 combat equipment. Okay. And so it was. There were some other boats that were larger that carried more equipment. But we were a very tight organization. We worked hard. It was a lot of hard work. 18 hours, 20 hours a day. It never stopped. Same like.
Were you dropping off Navy or Army?
We dropped off Army personnel, okay, and Marines as well. Okay. And we did have one particular mission where we went 3 times to Thailand, and we brought back the King's Royal Black Panther Division. They were a top-notch group, and 3 times we went back and forth from Vietnam to Thailand, and they came on board, and we supported them, right, during their operation.
And so where were they going?
They were going in to fight the North Vietnamese.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so you
we also worked with the South Vietnamese as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was a coalition group that we worked with there. There's no doubt about it.
Anybody ever give you any trouble when they got on your boat?
Not really. Okay. No, I mean, it's a serious time. Mm-hmm. No time for messing around. Once you get in there. We even had a boat come up and it broke off of the hooks, and it went all the way back down and sank. So I mean, there's a lot going on, and when the ship is at heavy seas, the ship is rolling. The hooks will come down into the boat, and you've got your bow hook. He's down there trying to hook up the boat, and it's a serious job. And once he gets that, then when the ship goes the other way, that gear will just bang, pick us up. Okay. So it's a loosening and then a falling at the same time. So okay. It's big excitement.
Oh, all right. It sounds like it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, we just took care of them all the time. I meant to bring some letters. I was going to kind of look at those, but my mother shows me the letters I wrote, and she said, "You were always painting that boat." I said, "That's what we did. We wanted to make, top notch." And the proudest moment I'd be on the bridge, and there was my boat, and Captain Gaucher would come over and he'd look at it. He was from Mississippi. I'm like, "That's the finest looking boat I've ever seen." Oh, yeah, thank you, sir. So there was those memories that never leave you. Those quiet moments that are.
So Captain Gaucher, how long was he?
Captain Gaucher was from Pascagoula, Mississippi, and he was on a year, and he's passed away. We just loved him. We thought he was great. I got a special Liberty Pass for naming. We were in the Alligator Amphibious Navy, so the captain got an alligator as a pet. And so there was a naming the contest. I named the Alligator Rosie, O-Gator. And nice. I won a free Liberty Pass, 48-hour pass. Nice. And so it's those quiet, cherished moments that mean a lot to you. And then we go back and we have these reunions. It's just all over again,
Now, did you guys celebrate anything like when you cross the international date line?
Oh, yeah.
Or-
Yes, I'm a shellback.
And what is that?
A shellback is when you cross the equator. I have a lot of slides of being a shellback. It's a big initiation. It's not any fun if you're a pollywog and you're not a shellback. That's what they call
okay.
you, a pollywog. But the pollywogs, the day before the shellback, we got even with the shellbackers because we invaded them and tortured them for the day. And then they really tortured us the next day. I am also a sailor of the Rock from the Rock of Gibraltar, and also a Blue Nose for being up on the USS Mount Whitney above the Arctic. You know, we went up all the way up into there, and a plank owner. And I'll talk about being a plank owner a little bit.
Yeah.
Because when I went back in 1980, the Navy actually gave me a $12,000 bonus. Sent me back to school, and from there I became, from a yeoman, an operations specialist. And the operations specialist was what they called a radarman in Vietnam. It's a new rate, it was a new job, and it was about operations basically. So after I got out of radar school or operations school, I went to the USS Mount Whitney, which is a Second Fleet flagship, LCC-20. And that was really wonderful duty, I must say. It was called Preferred Sea Duty. We had the Admiral, Second Fleet Admiral on board, and our job was to take care of him. While I was there, I passed as what they called an enlisted surface warfare specialist, and that's a certificate from it. I was one of the first sailors, if not the first sailor, to become ESWS qualified, as they called it. It had just started, and this was in a reference to the submariners had their dolphins. Well, now they said, you know, enlisted people, if you, and this is really a big deal, it's a lot of work. It's about a year to get ready for. And so that is my certificate for ESWS. And this was my photo on the USS Mount Whitney as an operations specialist. And I didn't get to go to the Mount Whitney's reunion that was just recent in the spring. I really wanted to go, but I didn't get to go. And the Mount Whitney, we went all in the Mediterranean, and we also went down to the Caribbean quite a bit, wherever the Admiral wanted to go. And that's why it was good duty, because if the Admiral wanted to be home on the holidays, he was home on the holidays.
Oh, wow.
When it got cold in Norfolk, he went down to the Caribbean. It was called Preferred Sea Duty because it was a very unique duty, as a matter of fact. I became very good friends with, well, not very good friends, let me just say. I worked for Admiral Lyons, not good friends, but we became close. I drove for him, I was a chauffeur, and I took care of what he needed to do while he was in the United States and overseas. I've got a lot of stories of that. I won't go into it, but it was very interesting duty. 25 of us volunteered.
Is that because it's
well, you get to
super
eat
secret?
you get to eat in his galley at sea. You're privy to hobnobbing with the heavies, if you will. He was Second Fleet, so you know there was people in the back of a car that we really didn't even want to talk about. You know, this is a secret and all that sort of thing.
Cool.
But you know, he was he was all military. You know, believe that. And I got to know his wife and his dog, and I'd go over to the house, and very quickly he said, "I see that you have orders. You're getting ready to leave." And I said, "Yes, I'm getting ready to take new orders." "Where would you like to go?" he said. I mean, this man was so nice. He tried to get me into college, but I was too old. See, when I went back in 1980, I was 34 years old. Yeah. So anyway, he said, "Where would you like to go?" And that was a big surprise. And I said, "Well, I've been reading all about the Aegis cruiser, which is the Navy's newest cruiser, the USS Yorktown, CG-48, and I'd love to go to that ship." He says, "You got it." Wow. So I was all excited. I went back to school and became a plank owner, which was some of the most interesting duty that one could have. It is the very first shipmate. If you're a plank owner, you're the first crew member on the ship. And so we went through a lot of training with that, no doubt about it. And this is one day they were taking down the Second Fleet Flagship, his pennant.
Wow.
And a good friend of mine was the signalman. And I said, what are you going to do with that? He says, we're going to throw it away. I said, no, I got to have that.
Nice.
He said, well, don't tell anybody, but I'll give it to you.
Nice.
So that's one of my souvenirs is the Second Fleet Flagship. And so that was pretty interesting duty. This is a photograph I thought was really interesting to show. It is a shock trial. The Yorktown was a Ticonderoga class cruiser. And after they built it in Pascagoula, Mississippi, they would take the ship out since the Ticonderoga was over in overseas at that time. They would blow up explosive as close as possible to the ship to see what would happen.
With people on it?
Yeah, oh yeah, we're fully manned. They would, I mean, it lifted the ship up out of the water, lifted us off the deck. We kind of flew up in the air.
Oh my God.
And glass broke, the ship shut down, the computers went down. The whole thing was just totally shut down. And of course, they're keeping a record of everything. They got specialists on board. Where are the leaks? You know, what happened here? And it's a big deal. And in fact, we had Arleigh Burke on board this thing, you know. So it was a clean sweep, as they call it. Admiral Burke was on, and he was, you know, all excited about this because the next destroyers are going to be named after him, the Arleigh Burke class. So he was on board, and we were pretty excited, you know, and they did that a couple of times, as a matter of fact. So we were up and running and combat ready in a pretty short period of time, which was, they were happy about it. That was down in Florida, off the Florida coast, and we went back to Pascagoula, Mississippi.
Was anybody injured?
Not that I recall, no. And so in July the 4th, 1984, the USS Yorktown was commissioned. My mother and dad came to the commissioning ceremony.
Cool.
I've got a bunch of photographs of them. And it was, we were in Yorktown, Virginia. And it was a big deal. After that, we went into New York. They showboated us everywhere because this was the $2 billion cruiser. That was a lot of money in that time.
Still a lot of money.
Yeah, we went all around in the Mideast, and we went to New York, which was fantastic, when they rededicated the Statue of Liberty. I've got a bunch of photographs of that. We were about 500 yards from the Statue of Liberty while they were...
I saw you. I watched that
Did
broadcast.
you?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was pretty exciting. Then we went into town to New York City, and of course nobody bought a drink for like 3 days. New York was just fantastic to us.
Awesome.
And after we left, one of the assignments that we undertook while we were over there, we were with the Ronald Reagan and the Freedom of Navigation operations in the Gulf of Sidra. Now, I was an OS at this time, an operations specialist. So we were in combat, in CIC, Combat Information Center. And our jobs is to, we had big screens in there that was probably antiquated now compared to what they have, but it was a real-time operation. And we were controlling aircraft and Tomahawk missiles and the whole deal. I mean, you see, when these people are shooting missiles today, that's, you know, that was part of my job. I didn't push the button, but we were all prepared for that. That was usually gunner's mates, our missile techs that did a lot of the shooting. But we were down in the Gulf of Sidra in 1986, and the Yorktown at around 21:55. Okay, that's what
Sorry,
is
I don't
that?
do military time. That's
18,
in the middle of the night,
19,
right?
20, yeah, it is. The attacked a Nanucha-class corvette was heading toward us. And so we vectored the intruders. We deployed Harpoon missiles, one of which hit the boat and causing massive damages. At the same time, the Yorktown fired 2 Harpoon missiles at another Combate II class boat.
And
So
they were from?
They were from Syria and
okay.
from Gaddafi,
Okay.
Libya.
Okay.
Syrians helped the Libyans at that time.
Okay.
And before that, in March of '86, we passed through Soviet waters, which was pretty exciting. To the we were with the Karen, the Crimean coast on the Black Sea, and what we did is we crossed into the Black Sea right off of the shores in Russia.
Wow.
Of course, they sent out all kinds of aircraft. We watched them, they watched us, and they were protesting, and this was a passage, it was a rite of passage, an exercise to the right of innocent passage is what the State Department. This was in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. And my dad made a copy of it. And so I kept that. It was...
So the Russians were protesting?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, we're right in through the Black Sea. Here's the Crimea up here. So they off on the shore. So it was all about snooping, basically. It really a rite of passage. I might go to jail for that. No, maybe not. We were told not to. No, I think it was just what you see today.
Right.
Was the rite of passage, international law.
That was right before they broke up, wasn't it?
Yes.
Right before Russia.
No,
broke up?
86. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it was in 86. So then you get a plank owner's certificate. Being a plank owner, these are 2 awards. And this is the USS Yorktown, CG-48. Now, the Yorktown is getting ready to have a reunion in next year in Tennessee. It will be at Knoxville. I was trying to think of Knoxville, Tennessee.
Okay.
So we're going to have a reunion of all the shipmates and for the Yorktown.
That's very cool.
The Yorktown was quite an experience, and it was some of the finest people I've ever served with. It was a crew. Now the Montrose, most of the people in the Montrose were college graduates. A lot of them were college graduates. They were just on deck because of the war, and in the Yorktown, we were handpicked. They wanted this to be the best.
Right.
This is a brand new ship. Let's make this the best.
Right.
So all of the sailors on there were top notch, and I couldn't be prouder for serving with the
And
Yorktown.
all of these ships are still...
Yeah,
in
the
the
Yorktown
water?
is decommissioned. The Montrose is decommissioned. I forgot to mention the Tulare, which was a year after the Montrose was decommissioned in 1969. I went on the USS Tulare, which was a cargo ship. I didn't go to Vietnam on that one. I was only on there for a short period of time.
What kind of cargo?
Same thing, combat equipment, whatever supplies, whatever was needed. And so I wanted to mention a couple of things that when I got back, I thought it was very, very nice of Missouri to give Vietnam veterans the state of Missouri Welcome Home medals. And I thought that was, appropriate. And at that time, and it was around the early 90s, 1990s, the American Legion, I was still in the reserve because when I got off the Yorktown in 1987, I worked in Dallas, and then I came to Malden, and I joined the Navy Reserve in 87. So I still had uniforms, had everything going. And the American Legion, we all, the guys out there, we gathered an idea that this 4th of July, all Navy veterans, or all veterans, Vietnam veterans, let's march in Malden. And so there is a photograph. I couldn't find it. I looked for it. My mother has it somewhere. That we marched through Malden. It was a proud moment. It was what we really wanted to do.
How many were you?
Huh?
How many?
There was probably 15, 20 guys. It was a pretty good parade. It was a nice parade. And it was a proud moment for all of us that had served in Vietnam that this was our parade.
Well, you should be proud of your service.
Well, thank you.
So.
I was going to say that what I received was 3 Good Conduct Medals and a Sea Service Deployment Ribbon, a Navy Unit Commendation, 2nd Award, Republic of Vietnam Campaign Medal, National Defense Service Medal, a Vietnam Service Medal with 4 Bronze Stars, Navy Expeditionary Medal, Battle E, 3rd Award, and those were my awards.
Wow.
And so today, I'm proud to be here in Malden. I had the honor of speaking on Memorial Day, and it was a great honor for me to tell about Memorial Day and to remember Malden's first decoration day as part of the talk. I thought that was really interesting. And it was a great honor to read the names of personnel in Malden, of our citizens who gave their lives, the ultimate in their lives.
Right.
So that's basically my story.
That's exciting and interesting, and
Well,
I'm
thank you.
really glad
Thank you.
that I got to hear your story.
Well, thank you.
That's re-
It's very kind of you.
So-
Yeah.
I'm just going to check and make sure I asked all of my
Okay.
questions.
I want to thank Mitch for putting this together, and I think it's a good idea that we can send this to the Library of Congress. I think, is that correct? It goes to the Library of Congress?
Yes.
I wanted to get my dad's story, and I waited too long.
Tell me a little bit about your dad's service, if you don't
Well,
mind.
I just know that he served in the submarines in World War II, and he didn't really talk about it a lot, but they were actually on the East Coast. They went up and down the East Coast and protected the coastline.
Wow.
And so I'm glad
Wow.
to hear that.
Well,
He was
you're
okay.
proud, strong
Yeah.
military family. That's awesome.
Yeah, Dad, we have a bunch of photographs of him and so forth, you know. So,
Probably looks just as good in his uniform as you do.
well, thank you.
Oh.
I couldn't fit in it today, but
Thank you so much for doing this, David. And
thank you for the
awesome.
interview, and thank you, Mitch, for the photography. I appreciate it very much.
thank you. Thank you for your service.